Thank you, that would be really good.
You can't move it, it's their screen showing.
If I became aggressive with her, I wouldn't get the end result. Here today?
Hello, Jim. How are you?
Pamela, how are you tonight?
I'm doing okay. You doing okay?
I am. Yes,
Well,
indeed.
good,
Thank you.
Good. I had planned to come by and see you sometime when I think you're not too busy and just spend a little time with you.
Thank you, Pamela. I would appreciate that very much.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm gonna try to do that before the week is out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, I'm glad you're here tonight.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for taking over the last while when I've been occupied. Otherwise, I appreciate it very much.
Well, you're quite welcome.
Yeah, but being able to spend some evenings with Rita was a gift. So I thank you.
Yes, for sure. For sure. You're quite welcome. You were so kind when my brother passed away and everything. It's really kind.
I still remember that service so well. It was just such a combination of sadness and joy and laughter and tears. It was just, that will stick with me the rest of my life.
Well, good.
It was so wonderful having your brother there at the service too. It was just a wonderful thing.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So,
You have a wonderful family.
well, thank you very much. I just think the world of them, I'll tell you.
Well, you should. I think they think the world of you too. It's pretty clear. They do.
Yeah.
It was awfully nice to see the sun today.
Oh, I was so happy. So happy.
Yes. I just don't think I could survive in a place like Seattle or Portland where it's a rarity.
No, I like to see the sun sometimes.
Yeah.
Now, I like the cold. I like all that good fresh air, but I don't like the rain and stuff that much. But I
No.
love the cold.
I think we've had more rain in the last 12 months than I can remember.
I
Seems
think
like,
so.
yeah. I think,
We've never had a rainy, that I can recall, a rainy winter like this before.
yeah, it's just very strange. I don't know what's going on. But we're a lot better off than the folks in Texas.
That's true. That's
No,
very
not.
true.
I
That's very true.
talked to Rita's sister lives in Austin, Texas, and they just the last couple of days got power and water, all of those things, and pretty cold.
It's pretty cold and devastating with the pipes bursting, and
Yeah,
it's very unusual for Texas, for sure.
they certainly weren't prepared for it.
No, not at all.
Especially Austin. I know, and I can remember being in Dallas during the winter sometimes where it was very cold, but
Mhm.
not Austin as much.
Well, I've only been to Dallas one time, and that was in the summer.
Yeah,
And it was it was hot.
Yeah, people used to say there were two seasons, hot, cold. That was it.
I tell you, it was hot, but I had a good time.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's 7. I don't know, is Cassie, are
Commissioner,
you?
Commissioner Farrell's not on yet.
Okay, that's, I don't know whether he was going to make it tonight or not.
I spoke to him a few moments ago, probably about the top of the hour. There he is. He said he was going to be here, so
Okay, I'll give him a,
he just popped up.
Okay.
oh, he did, okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's 7 o'clock, so I think we're all here. So I would call the regular meeting of the Pittsburgh Board of Commissioners for February 22, 2021 to order. And as is our custom, I would ask us to have a moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you. Jay, would you lead us in the pledge?
My pleasure, Mayor. Thank you. Would everybody rise? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Next item would be the adoption of the agenda. So I would entertain a motion to adopt the agenda or modify it.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, unanimous. So the first item on the agenda is manager updates. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think we all can start off with by saying we're glad to see you back. Obviously,
Yes.
wish it was better circumstances for you and Miss Rita, but we are very happy to see you back, and we are still here for you in this phase of it. So you know, we know it's a long road ahead, but we're here for you. And if you need something, you let us know.
Thank you, Chris.
Yes, sir. On more less significant matters that we deal with business and in our agenda. One item of note that we have, it's not for this agenda in particular, but it's for our next one. I just want to go ahead and make it known. We had originally scheduled a few weeks back for Robeson's Walk, MUPD. There was a development agreement, and the review of the zoning was originally scheduled for our next meeting on March 8th. Planning staff has been in much conversation with the developer, and there's still some things we want to tighten up with that. We thought we would have everything tidied up by this point. But again, just in the world in which we live, things don't always happen as fast as we would like. So we're going to put that one off. We do not have a date certain for when it will come back to the board. So whenever we do resolve the comments that we have existing, we will then set the hearing again, and then basically put everyone on notice that to be anticipating both the zoning review for the MUPD as well as the development agreement that complements that document. So I just want to let everyone know that that will not be on next week's or our next regular meeting on March 8th. Just a couple other updates, and I'm sure there will be some overlap with some of the commissioner comments. But the DOT traffic circle is going well. Obviously, still a big mess, but project is proceeding ahead of schedule. We are currently still in phase 2 of the construction. For those familiar with it, there are 3 phases, despite phase 3 being 3A and 3B. We're working with Sunrock, DOT's contractor right now, about how we can find the more expeditious completion of the project, certainly to resolve a lot of the issues that we're seeing today, just, inconvenience of traffic, some roads in disrepair on some detour routes. So we're going to work with the contractor and try to expedite that as best we can without sacrificing the betterment of the project. But again, we're ahead of schedule. As we move into phase 3, which we hope to be around the first week of April, so not too far away, we'll be really looking to more towards more night work than the daytime work. So traffic will get back to some semblance of normalcy with some hopefully minimal interruptions during the daytime. But again, we're going to work with the contractor, and they've been really responsive to any needs that we have, both from a local business perspective and from town and DOT perspective. So I don't think anyone is been bashful about reaching out to me, and that's my job. So I'm more than happy to field those calls. But if anyone has any questions or concerns, let me know or let one of your commissioners know, and they'll get it to me, and we'll see what we can do on our end to try to rectify some of those issues. And in a related but a separate project, for those who are aware, we've closed the parking along East Salisbury and that first block between Hillsborough Street and North Masonic. Parking remains closed for the next week. We were hoping to have a little weekend work, maybe wrap that project up with a couple sunny days over the last, Saturday and Sunday, most preceding today. Unfortunately, that project didn't get done. You go out there today, there's still piles of dirt and some metal plates out there to get you into some of the private parking lots. So we're working with the contractor. We had some silt issues today, to say the least. We're working with them to make sure that we don't have any more silt spilling down the road. But we're hoping that project's going to get tidied up very soon. And for those who aren't aware of what that one is, because it's less publicized, that's an upgrade for an 8-inch water line that is going to connect back to East Street. So it's going to go that first block of East Salisbury and then connect down Masonic over to East Street. And so that's an upgrade from a 6-inch to an 8-inch water line to facilitate a better looping in our system and pressure, but also to serve the Eagle site. And so we know there's no good time to tear up a road and block a road. Now may actually be the worst time because there's already a detour that's using that. So we're hoping to get in and out. So we appreciate everyone's patience with that one. And that one will be resolved quicker than not. So just wanted to get everyone a quick update on some of those projects in downtown, just so information is consistent for those who may be listening. They can share with their friends and family if they have concerns about those. And that's all I have for you tonight.
Thank you, Chris.
Yes, sir.
All I have is were there some questions for Chris? Okay. All I have was to express my appreciation to the board and to the town staff for their kindness and for their support during kind of a difficult time for me, and to especially thank Mayor Pro Tem Baldwin for stepping in and doing such a fantastic job. I very much appreciate it. So thank you. So we'll start with commissioner updates. And Jay, any updates?
Yes, I attended the Parks and Rec meeting on February the 10th. It was kind of quick. They were still interested in possibly a parks planner, for the recs, how that was going. I told them that would be coming up in the next possibly budget meeting. They have 2 openings on the board. 2 people have left, but there's 2 openings on the Parks and Rec board.
Okay.
That's pretty much, nothing much else going on with that.
Okay.
Hey,
Kyle?
who has left?
Good question there, Michael. It was Sarah. Let's see, Sarah Carr was there.
Okay.
Oh man, now you put me on the spot.
Well, don't worry about it. We'll talk offline. I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
Okay.
And I'll say for that one, Teresa, can you send the board an email with the current roster?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And that way they can see who remains on the board, who may have come off without their knowledge, and they can maybe fill in the gaps and help recruit a couple new members.
Yes.
Thank you.
Kyle?
Yes, with the Pittsburgh Boys and Girls Club, we're making slow and steady progress on the fundraising campaign, and we are working on a video campaign for that to help kick that effort into gear. So continued progress there, and no other updates for me.
Okay. All right. Michael?
Chris, thanks for the update on the circle. I think you're way more involved and informed than I am, but looking at it from my eye, I see the work progressing well. And I'd like to just mention that in addition to Sungate being, I think, very responsive and capable. NCDOT, Brandon Jones and Gary Phillips are both, they've been just so excellent in responding to the town's needs. When the thing got started, you know, it was a difficult pill to swallow with the change in traffic. But when we reached out to them to ask permission to put up signs to remind everybody that Main Street or Pittsburgh, downtown Pittsburgh is open, they were right on the spot. They were helpful. So, you know, I just think they're being a great partner in this endeavor. It's a tough time, but I think they're helping tremendously. So thanks to them for that. Main Street Pittsburgh is putting up the signs. If you, in your travels, find that you think downtown would benefit from the location of one of our signs, please let us know of that location. We've got some extras. So I think we could sprinkle some more throughout. So if you come up to an area and you say, gosh, really could use a sign to help reinforce downtown, let me know and we'll try to get them. Oh, Jay, can you fill in again for the Parks and Rec on the 10th? Looks like on March 10th, looks like I'm not going to be in town that day. So.
Okay.
Okay,
March the
great.
10th. All right.
Thank you. Oh, Main Street Pittsburgh has submitted their budget request to Chris, and we are also working with the county and the EDC to put in a request on the budget for the county as well. At the PBA meeting, there were some questions about Pittsburgh's approach to affordable housing. So it was a reminder of the need for our policies to become regulations. And when I explained to the folks, I felt it reinforced our ideas that I think we've got very good ideas about how to go about having a program. I know it's tough to get code written, but I think we've got the right ideas. So we'll continue to work on that. TARPO, happy to report that there was a supportive vote of TARPO in Pittsburgh's request of the DOT to revisit our comprehensive transportation plan. So we'll see if we can get that on schedule, but TARPO was backing Pittsburgh in the request, so was happy to get their support. That's all I've got.
Thank you. Right. Pam?
No, I don't have anything. Thank you.
Okay. John?
I have no updates. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Next matter then is citizen matters. Do we have anyone signed up or that wishes to address the board?
No, sir, I did not receive any.
All right. The next item then would be to either approve or amend the consent agenda. So if I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda or to modify it.
So moved to approve.
Okay. Is there a second?
Yes, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Consent agenda is passed. So our next item on the agenda is to have a public hearing regarding the Pittsburgh Fire Department installment loan for the purchase of the ladder truck. So I would entertain a motion to go into public hearing on this
So
issue.
moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Do we have anyone signed up to speak at this public hearing?
I don't have anyone.
All right.
Attorney Paul Messick wants to speak.
All right.
Mr. Mayor and members of the board, if it's not clear from the description that's in the agenda package, I'd be glad to try to answer any questions that you have. This procedure is substantially similar to something you all did, I think, last year for the Thales Academy. It allows the financing that the fire department is going to undertake with First Bank to be tax exempt as far as the interest that they're going to pay to the bank, assuming you all approve the resolution that's in the agenda package. There's no liability on the part of the town for any of the repayment of the debt, excuse me. So it's really pretty straightforward, and it's a benefit to the bank and to the fire department.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Messick? All right.
I have just one question about the overall project, not related to the specific matter of the financing or this town endorsement of the nonprofit status of the financing. Curious if the fire chief had explored the package that might include equipment for mitigating the engine idling or emissions from that engine idling.
I might be best to answer that, Mr. Bonnets. So as going through the design, and Chief Griffin, he and I have talked exhaustively about this, as well as the truck in general. And to his credit, he allowed me to entertain some conversations directly with the supplier. Even the supplier had concerns about running idle mitigation on an aerial device like a ladder. And so it seemed to be that because the ladders run off a PTO, that during that type of service, they didn't think that the batteries would support everything with it, that you're running the engine either way. And I had a little bit of back and forth. I think it's probably it wasn't as clear of a conversation as I perhaps would have hoped. Obviously, the truck was well into design at that point. The removal of the batteries that would be required on a apparatus of that size would end up shifting around all the storage that would go into that. So I think, as I say, I think we gave it the old college try and tried to work out something with it. And Chief Griffin's more than welcome. He's much more an expert in fire apparatus than I, but it seemed like it was a better application on a different apparatus size. But E1, who is likely going to be, or really is going to be, the provider of the apparatus, it seemed like to me that it was an unproven technology, and they were hesitant to commit whether it would provide the results that the idle mitigation has been described. And I did a lot of research after you brought that up, and I think it's really a fascinating concept, because it really does, I think, provide a lot of emissions control for that. It just didn't seem like that it was the best for the ladder. And I had a conversation as recently, I believe it was last week, with the gentleman from E1. So even though the truck has been fully designed, and it would probably be a slight sabotage to the timeline to try to add it on now, I think we still want to continue those conversations, because we know this won't be the last truck that we are a part of, or there isn't bought in the town of Pittsboro. So I'm very curious about it. But it just seemed like all the dominoes stacked in the wrong direction for us to try to get on this truck.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. I appreciate it. And Mr. Griffin, did you have anything to elaborate?
Okay, no, like Chris said, it was a lot of different design issues. There has been a couple of trucks done like this with different manufacturers, and there has been a lot of redesign, as Chris stated, with the timeline. As he said, this go round for an aerial truck, a platform, was pretty difficult. So it really hasn't been any proven information to be able to take hold of this and go for it.
So our friends at the Charlotte Fire Department haven't trod this ground before with a ladder truck using idle mitigation?
They have, and they have had a lot of issues with that. It is an ongoing thing with the ladder truck, and with us, with our operation procedures. When we go to a call, the truck or the generator, either one, is in gear, ready to go at all times. And so it was sort of defeating the purpose of what everybody was trying to accomplish with emissions, because the truck's going to be running, and spending that kind of money. I'm not saying it was a waste of money, but sort of unnecessary with an aero device.
And to add to Chief Griffin's comments, and again, he gave me some latitude to talk directly with the supplier, and I figured I'd get the salesman pitch, and they say, absolutely, we'd love to add that onto there. That's an add-on to them from a cost perspective and a certain markup, and even they seemed uncertain about it. So that's when I think as a team on our side, we said, well, if the supplier is kind of waffling on the idea and they are making money on it, it's probably an unproven market. But again, I think it's not to diminish the overall concept and idea, because I think it's a worthwhile thing to consider with future apparatus, and hopefully something that we can at least just discuss further or earlier in the process, so that we don't get to the 11th hour potentially and say, oh, well, we're not looking at a redesign. If we factor it in, and then we can look at the efficacy of adding it earlier and talking with the chief, and saying, okay, for your needs, does this work for y'all at that point? So I really appreciate the idea and kind of pushing the boundary of what we are accustomed to doing, but unfortunately, it wasn't going to work with this one.
Well, I appreciate y'all looking into it. And Chief Griffin, of course, we've had the fire chief from City of Charlotte up to several events where we had equipment on display, and so I'd very much like to hear more about any of those issues, because we hadn't heard about these issues. Yeah, maybe I can follow up with you in the course of my day job.
Yes, sir, absolutely. And I can get more information if needed for you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other comments or questions, or anyone else that wishes to speak during this public hearing? Well, hearing none, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
And seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All
I'm
right.
sorry, can you tell me who seconded that?
I'm sorry.
I did.
Okay, thank you.
One of us did.
Well, both of us did.
Yeah,
It's tough. I think John had the second.
we'll check the tape.
The next item is entertain a motion to adopt the resolution. Is there any discussion concerning the resolution? If not, I would entertain a motion to adopt the resolution.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you. That then moves us on to old business, which the first is the rezoning for Northwood MUPD. Teresa, I think you're doing that.
Mayor Ness,
Sorry.
this is Kaylee
Oh,
Mullins.
Kayla, you're doing it. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Let me share my screen. Okay, can everybody see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Eco Northwood MUPD LLC is proposing an amendment to the MUPD rezoning approved April 9th, 2018 by the Board of Commissioners. The proposed amendment adds a 2.91 acre parcel 72825 and modifies the terms and conditions of the MUPD master plan and the illustrative site plan. The 2.91 acre parcel is located at the intersection of US 15501 and US 64 East Business. Both the MUPD master plan and the illustrative site plan have been revised. A total of 91.37 acres was rezoned to MUPD in 2018. Currently proposed is 94.29 acres. Lot configuration and street revisions are proposed in this rezoning amendment. Please refer to the revisions from previously approved rezoning document provided by the applicant for a complete list of the proposed changes. The future land use map designates this parcel as commercial. Commercial areas are located with convenient access to US 64 business and US 15501, particularly near major intersections. Encouraged uses are those that benefit from convenient highway access, including general commercial, restaurants, building supply, light manufacturing, distribution, and professional services. Development in these areas should be well planned with street front and interior lot landscaping, coordinated building styles, attractive signage, and shared driveways / access where appropriate. In 2018, 18 proposed lots with a maximum of 21 lots and a different street layout was shown. Now there are 26 proposed lots with a maximum of 26 lots shown. The tree coverage area, open space, and recreation space proposed is in compliance with the requirements of the Northwood MUPD. The tree coverage area currently proposed is 13.8 acres. In 2018, 11.91 acres of TCA was approved. The open space / recreation space approved in 2018 was 19.35 acres and currently proposed is 23.04 acres. 5% of the gross land in the MUPD must be reserved for recreation space. They are exceeding this requirement by providing 23.04 acres. This acreage will come from a community park adjoining Lot 9 and from recreational space within the multifamily area, Lot 15. Since the opening of the public hearing on January 25th, 2021, there has been one change to the rezoning amendment items. The changes to the tree coverage area plan, specifically the tree inventory chart and the number of trees to be kept. Please note the total tree preservation area of 13.80 acres did not change. The TCA plan shown at the January 25th, 2021 Board of Commissioners meeting had approximately 118 trees labeled to be kept. And this is your tree inventory chart right here, and anything labeled in green is labeled as to be kept. Currently, approximately 103 trees are labeled to be kept. Majority of the trees that are no longer labeled to be kept are on Lot 26. The applicant has expressed their desire to clear cut Lot 26 and communicated that these trees were incorrectly labeled as to be kept. The public hearing for this rezoning amendment was opened at the January 25th, 2021 Board of Commissioners meeting and closed at the February 8th, 2021 Board of Commissioners meeting. No comments were made at the opening or closing of the public hearing. The Planning Department did not receive any public comment on the proposed amendment. The Planning Board met on February 1st, 2021 and found the proposed rezoning of parcel 72825 to be consistent with the future land use plan and recommended approval of the rezoning from RA to MUPD. The written recommendation of the Planning Board inadvertently failed to include any recommendation as to the changes to the MUPD master plan and illustrative site plan. However, the Planning Board packet contained information on all the proposed changes for this rezoning amendment. Staff finds this property to be in a suitable location for mixed-use plan development, compatible with surrounding uses and consistent with the future land use plan. Therefore, staff recommends approval of the proposed rezoning amendment. Staff recommends the Board of Commissioners make two separate motions. Motion 1, make a motion to adopt the attached resolution adopting a land use plan consistency statement for approval or denial. Motion 2, make a motion to adopt the attached resolution amending or denying an application for an amendment to the zoning ordinance of the town of Pittsboro. Please note that the applicant and engineer are here to answer any questions. Thank you.
There any questions or discussion from the commissioners?
I'm disappointed at the decline in the number of trees to be kept.
That's inaccurate, Commissioner Bonnets. We actually have more trees than we did previously in our previous zoning. There was a mistaken submittal, and so there was a reduction from the original submittal, but that was an engineer error. But we actually have 2 or 3 more acres, I believe is correct, Kaylee.
So the total tree preservation area has changed from 13.8 acres?
No, it's still the same, but the trees labeled to be kept, the actual number of those trees from when I compared the two have gone down by approximately 15 trees.
But not from 2018. That's the point I was making, Commissioner Bonnets, that the submittal was incorrect. So there are 15 less trees, but there's still more acres of trees being saved in this submittal than there were when we originally submitted. That's the only.
Oh, the change from the 2018 submittal, there were fewer acres.
Correct.
Thank you for that clarification.
Any other questions, comments? Discussion? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the land use plan consistency statement.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I would now entertain a motion to vote on the rezoning amendment application.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion is passed. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the zoning text amendment for the microbreweries. And who is going to present that?
Yes, sir. This is Teresa Thompson
Hi,
presenting.
Teresa.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor Nass and members of the board. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Let me see if I can make it larger. Okay. Red Moose Brewing Company is requesting to add the use microbrewery as a permitted use in the C1, which is neighborhood business, C2, highway commercial, C4, the downtown central business, M1 and M2, which is the light and heavy industrial, and also the MUPD, the mixed use plan development zoning districts. There is also a proposed definition for microbreweries being capped at 15,000 barrels per year. And it's also limited to direct sales to customers. So microbreweries are more suitable for on-site customers. A public hearing was held on January 25th. No one spoke in favor or against the request. Board comments included adding microbreweries as a permitted use in the MUPD zoning district, which has been added. There was also a note to make breweries only permitted in the industrial zoning districts in the proposed UDO, since that's a more intensive land use. The planning board met on February 1st and recommended approval. And staff recommends the board to make 2 separate motions. The first would be to adopt the attached resolution for the land use plan consistency statement for approval. And the second motion would be to adopt the attached resolution amending an application for a text amendment to the Pittsburgh zoning ordinance. And please let me know if you have any questions.
Teresa, one question just for clarity. I think you mentioned that breweries would be limited to the industrial zones. Are they already limited to the industrial zones, or are we making some change to the ordinance to incorporate that as well?
Well, it's currently not in the zoning ordinance, but it's currently in the proposed UDO as permitted in all the same districts as microbreweries.
Okay,
So during the public hearing, there was comments made that breweries should only be permitted by right in the industrial zoning districts for the proposed UDO.
okay, so not for this action tonight.
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions or comments?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Well, let's, to
Oh,
approve the land
consistency
use
statement.
consistency.
Yes,
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
aye,
Aye.
Good. Now entertain a motion to approve the text amendment.
so moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye,
Aye.
All right, thank you. The next item is the resolution supporting of the EID CDA federal carbon fee and dividend policy. Who is presenting on this, if anyone?
Mr. Mayor, I will defer to Mr. Bonnets
All right,
to remind everyone, this was one of our consent agenda items last month or last meeting. And the board pulled that off. We moved it to miscellaneous. We had some conversation on it, and we just the board elected to bring it back tonight as a business item. And so that kind of catches us up from a procedure standpoint, and it's on your agenda tonight. If you wish to adopt it, Mr. Bonnets is far more familiar than I, so I will defer any of my supposed comments to him, allow him to better educate both y'all and the public.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. And thank you, board, for entertaining this concept. Thank also to those of you who are present for the 2017 resolution approval and your participation in that. As you know, I've spent a good chunk of my professional career focusing on climate change and helping move our economy in ways that emits less greenhouse gases and contributes less to climate change. The thing that strikes me about this is while in grad school I studied international climate policy, in other words, the treaties and agreements that we might come to address the issue, and that was 20 years ago. I didn't focus so much on domestic climate policy, but I have friends who have, and I have followed that. Not as in depth as when I was studying for my master's, but the key observation that I would bring here is that the EICDA, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, is a market-based proposal. The emphasis is definitely on the market and incentivizing behavior and technologies that will emit less pollution and deliver more efficiency so we can all squeeze more usefulness and energy out of every dollar. The plan is that a small fee will be imposed on sources of carbons at the source, in other words, at the well or the mine, the natural gas well, the oil well, or the coal mine. Those fees will be assessed, like in the first year, it would be a $15 per ton of carbon fee. And in successive years, an additional $10 would be added. And this does increase the cost of energy for all of us who consume energy, but that will be offset for most of us, more than offset by this monthly dividend. All of those fees that are collected from the source of fossil fuel are then paid back out to citizens, and that happens in a way that's very prompt and rapid, so that we actually receive monies in our bank or a check in the mail that for most of us who don't consume an awful lot of fossil fuel, it would more than make up for that and thus incentivize us with cash in our pockets to be able to pay that small premium for a better air conditioner, a better furnace, a better, more efficient car. And it has been endorsed by some very prominent conservative economists. So I feel like it's a really good policy. All that we're saying with this resolution is that we strongly encourage the Congress to consider enacting this policy. It will be, of course, up to our elected representatives in Congress to do so. So that's it in a nutshell. And I'd be happy to entertain questions.
The questions or discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't really have any questions. I appreciate John calling me this afternoon. I'm still a little iffy about this because I feel like that this bottom line to this fee or dividend is going to come back down to our lower and middle class people, such as myself. If we're going to get some type of dividend out of it, I'm sure we're going to be paying for it in the long run. I'm just really confused on how it's going to work out. Sure, I know battery cars and all like this is coming and all like this, but I'm not ready to move forward to this. But it's whatever the will of the board is fine with me.
DJ. Any other comments or discussion on this? I personally support this resolution, and as John mentioned, we're asking the Congress to proceed, and I'm sure that as this moves its way through Congress, it may undergo some amendments from time to time, but I think in the long term that's going to benefit not only us, but our future generations. If there aren't any other discussions, I would entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Looks like 4-1. Jay not voting.
A nay, sorry.
Nay for Jay. Okay. And ayes from the rest. Thank you. All right.
Thank you, board, and thank you, Commissioner Farrell, for engaging the conversation. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for your work. It's all good.
So we move on to new business, which the first item on the new business agenda is final plat for Chatham Park, section 5.1, Vine Parkway.
Yes, sir. This is Teresa again, and I'm going to. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
All right. So tonight we have 3 final plat approval requests, which is going to be in the vineyard section of Chatham Park. So here you can see Chatham Park's planned development district zoning area, which is the green color in relation to the town city limits.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, so the final plats tonight are within section 5.1. And this area is located to the north of Thompson Street and east of Fire Tower Road. And here's a map of Chatham Park's North Village land use plan, the proposed land use plan for the small area plan. And this area includes single family townhome subdivision, also includes the Night Farm Community Park and proposed amenity center. There will also be 2 greenway trails parallel to the streams on either side of the vineyards. And there's also going to be 2 new thoroughfares, the Vine Parkway and Wendover Parkway. And Vine Parkway, which is the first final plat for tonight, is the northern section of Vine Parkway. The southern section south of Edgefield Street, right here, this has already been final platted. So we're looking at from this traffic circle all the way up to Wendover Parkway. And just a recap of the final plat process. So Chatham Park's already received preliminary plat approval. They also received construction drawing approval. So they started construction and approximately 96% of that construction is complete and has been inspected by town staff. What's left is some sidewalk, multi-use path, street trees, and landscaping, all of which will be bonded for in the form of a letter of credit. And that will be approved, reviewed, and approved by the town attorney and town staff before the final plat is recorded in the Register of Deeds office. Streetlights will also be installed by Duke Energy. The planning board met on February 1st and recommended approval. And the final plat has been reviewed in accordance with town standards, and therefore staff recommends approval of the final plat for Vine Parkway. And please let me know if you have any questions.
Any questions for Teresa?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead, John.
No, I'll defer to you.
Just one on that graphic that's on there now. I'm not sure if this is this one or the next one, but the piece of Wendover Parkway that goes to the west of Vine Parkway, does that just end at the property line there, or what's the termination of that?
Close to it, yes, sir. Not all the way to the end. There is, let me see if I can, the construction, so the right of way goes all the way to the end of the property line, but the construction ends close to where that little dot is, where it says C10. That's where the construction actually ends. And that's how it was approved in the construction drawings.
Okay. And then I see that this is about 96% complete. I drove through there today. I guess actually it looks like a lot of the streets downtown with piles of material on them and construction equipment and things like that. I guess when do we expect that to change or not?
That might be a question for the applicant to answer on when their expected timeline is for completion.
Is the applicant available?
Yes, we are. This is Alicia Albini with Withers Ravenel. Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, commissioners.
Hi.
Just to check really quick, make sure you can hear us okay?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Kyle, to answer your question concerning construction traffic, you know, as they're wrapping up and wrapping up Subdivision West, you'll see construction traffic out there moving the earthwork material. However, prior to, you know, being open to the public and prior to pulling COs, you know, we would anticipate a majority of that construction traffic could actually be internal to the development surrounding Vine Parkway, Wendover Parkway.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor, I would just kind of point out for the record that there, just to remind the board and those in the audience, that there is a differentiation between the adoption of the final plat and acceptance of the road. So it's an offer of dedication to endorse a plat where it says public, but it is not accepted until the board renders a future decision to formally accept the roads for public maintenance.
Thank you.
That's very helpful.
Yes, sir.
And Chris, clarify that our warranty period on this road?
It's 1 year, and I'll allow Mr. Messick to correct me.
Yes, you're right. After acceptance.
After acceptance.
So,
Got it.
at a future date, we will have an offer of acceptance probably best done by resolution of the board. That date on that resolution will start the 1-year period for the warranty.
Make a motion to approve.
Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay.
I will make one comment. I realize we're moving on to the second and related item for Wendover Parkway, but it
John,
was,
if I could interrupt just for a moment, just for the record, to note that that the action was to approve the final plat, and it was approved. Thank you. Okay.
yes.
Go ahead.
I'll just note that the drawing is a bit confusing. And I suppose that's because these were submitted independently with the possibility that Wendover might not have made sufficient progress, but in this first drawing for Vine Parkway, not seeing Wendover heading to the east is just a little puzzling.
And so the Vine Parkway plat, the final plat, it was about 3 pages. So where it actually shows the details, it's just a portion. It's like the south portion of Vine and the north portion. And this third sheet is actually showing the remainder tract, which is tract A1. And I just used that for the PowerPoint, just so you could kind of get an overall view.
Very good.
But the final plat isn't just that. And then when we go to the Wendover plat, it's specifically for that portion of that final plat. So that's
Very
why.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. I appreciate that. I just
Yes, sir.
didn't look far enough.
Yeah. And actually, after this slide, I'll show you the Wendover. So next is Wendover Parkway. This is also going to be a public right-of-way given to the town of Pittsburgh once it's accepted. And Wendover is approximately 93% complete. And so again, this is kind of like an overview of Wendover. So it includes, if you look at the final plat, all of these sheets are separate, but I thought that would be more confusing. So I just wanted to give like an illustration of the overall. And Wendover is approximately 93% complete and has been inspected by town staff, minus sidewalk, multi-use path, street trees, and landscaping, which again will be bonded for before the final plat is recorded. Streetlights will also be installed by Duke Energy. The planning board met on February 1st and recommended approval. And the final plat has been reviewed in accordance with town standards, and therefore staff recommends approval of the final plat for Wendover Parkway. And please let me know if you have any questions.
Any questions or comments on the Wendover plat? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second. And Michael, all those in favor?
Aye.
Fine. That's so it is approved. The next one is the final plat for subdivision North Phase 4A and 4B. That you as well, Teresa?
Yes, sir.
All right.
This is the last one. And 4A, 4B consists of and here's the small area plan, so you can kind of get an idea of where we're looking for subdivision North, 4A, 4B. I know it's hard to keep up with all the subdivisions, so we try to put a little map together for you. And the total lots for 4A, 4B is 25 single family detached lots and 8 townhome lots. And this subdivision is approximately 54% complete, minus the streets, greenway trail, storm drainage, street trees, landscaping, a few other items, again, which will all be bonded for. And the planning board met on February 1st, recommended approval. And the final plat has been reviewed in accordance with town standards. And therefore, town staff recommends the board to make a motion to approve the final plat for subdivision North Phase 4A, 4B. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Any questions or discussion? Not, I would entertain a motion to approve. Is
So moved.
there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. All right, approved. Thank you. Thank you, Teresa.
Yes, sir.
That takes us to miscellaneous, the planning department report to the board of the UDO.
Hey. So we have 2 items for discussion, but we also have an update on the timeline. So we'll go through the 2 items first, and then the timeline will be right after that. So the first topic for discussion is private streets. The proposed UDO requires streets to be public in minor and major subdivisions, for residential subdivisions specifically. And there was some discussion from what I've been told in the past about if that's something that has the board consensus or not. So we wanted to offer that up for discussion on if the board would like to allow the option for private streets as well, which staff recommends adding. And if there's any, if you'd like for staff to look into this further, we can do that. But with it just being only allowed for public streets, that is restrictive. You do see it in some jurisdictions, but typically there's an option for public or private. So we just wanted to gauge the board on what your thoughts are on that.
Well,
And Teresa, I think for those jurisdictions that do permit private streets, there's also the caveat that they meet the public roadway standards. So you don't sacrifice accessibility for emergency services and those types of matters. You just allow the private folks to maintain the roads.
Yes, sir. And they would all have to meet the same standards.
Right.
DOT, and the town's also working on creating town specifications now that we have a new town engineer. We're all working on that as well. So that will be coming to the board hopefully in the next few months or so when we get all the specifications worked out.
And to complement Commissioner Fioco's comment, part of the, I'll say strategy, if you will, of requiring both public and private to be of the same standard is invariably HOAs fail. And as HOAs fail, it is a common request to ask the elected body of the municipality in which that road is situated to come to the saving grace of the HOA who has failed to properly collect the necessary dues for capital improvements to continue to maintain their roads. And it is quite common. I've been a part of several of them, obviously predating my time in Pittsburgh, where roads that were forever to be private miraculously couldn't be maintained by the private anymore, and the elected body was compelled to take them over. So hedging a little bit on that side, that's also a benefit. Certainly the most prominent, as Commissioner Fioco said, is the equality of access on both public and private roads. But also we know that HOA and POA constructs do fail, and that the elected body is oftentimes asked to take those over. So it's having a greater confidence in that street surface. I would also note that we would differentiate between an alley and a street. And so the private alleys generally would remain privately maintained into a perpetual situation, whereas it is unlikely that there would be a public standard for an alleyway. We would probably just have maybe a more compact street standard, but I think the town would, when we prepare our cross sections, that would go either into the UDO and or an appendix of the UDO or engineering manual, that there would be a differentiation between our street standards and private alleys.
Chris, I would think we would want to make sure that those alleys are well-designed though and can support the access of emergency vehicles and whatnot, because clearly that will be, there will be incidents where that's the point of access.
Right. And so, generally from a fire protection standpoint, the fire department wants to get to within 150 feet to the center of the back of the structure.
Yeah.
And so if you have a deep lot, you may end up in a situation where your fire access would be access off the alley. That would, I'll say, inflate the alley to where there's a hyper focus on the width, meaning that it's probably in excess of 20 feet for the road surface, and that there's particular attention paid to the radius and turnarounds that would be provided off that alleyway. And so for many lots, that the alleyway concept is really for kind of a rear loading concept in most situations and applications. And so you might still be able to provide that 150 feet to the center of the back of the structure off I'll say the public street. We do want to make sure that we account for, I'll say, some creative designs that would potentially have a front loading situation off an alley where we'd have to pay attention to that fire access.
So I'm a supporter of the concept of allowing private roads, as long as we are cognizant of the need for them to perform in a public way.
Yes.
I would support that too. I think we've seen a lot of, we spend a lot of time on public roads in subdivisions. And I think that it would be good if we could see maybe a quick document of the advantages and disadvantages of public and private roads and subdivisions. But it seems that there's advantages to allowing subdivisions to manage their own roads.
I'll say the most prototypical standard for a subdivision with private streets is one when there's no access. So when you have a subdivision that is not accessed through, and for a local context, again, I don't want to bring too much into the conversation. I'm just using the two as an example. Chatham Forest has access through it. So it's actually got a proponent to stay public because the public can use that for there is a public benefit to traversing through that neighborhood. Powell Place is functionally one way in and one way out as it's currently laid out. Generally, your public roads are throughways. They don't dead end. They end up in an intersection, and you keep moving to your next destination. So certainly, my familiarity with them is, golf course communities. They're gated. They have finite perimeters. They don't provide other access. That as soon as you hit that gatehouse, everything behind it's private because you're really separating yourself from the public good and the private good. So the advantage, most obviously for privatizing roads, is that the impact is on the individual community and not on the entire tax base. And certainly there's conversations to be had with future roads and how those are dedicated out. But I mean, there's a lot of common goods that could be argued for, but I think that's the most obvious argument, is that if it doesn't provide access through your development, then it probably lends itself more to being private than public. If there's through access, then generally there is a public good being served with it, and therefore there's more credence to it being publicly maintained.
So with advantages versus disadvantages, is that something for like a future discussion to move forward with having the option with private streets for now with the UDO, moving forward with the UDO, or are you requesting to hold off?
I think what I heard, and maybe I just need to articulate this, Ms. Thompson, Mr. Kennedy, is it would be helpful for us to see a staff memo that outlines pros and cons for adding this type of language to the UDO.
Okay.
And I would say how it would be incorporated in the UDO as well. I think I'd be interested to include it in there.
So you would be looking for draft language.
The draft language is actually rather simple.
That's what I'm thinking.
I mean, basically you have a cross section based upon an ADT, which is your average daily trips. And so when there's a road that's designed, there's a trip calculation, which you would see in a traffic impact analysis, or anything less than that. The ITE standards specify the number of trips per day for the type of housing. So if it's a single family detached dwelling, your ADT is like 9.3. If it's a townhome, your ADT is 6.8. And so basically what we do is say, based on the number of homes along that stretch, this is the type of road that it is. And since we're not DOT, we're not the major thoroughfare, commercial collector type roads. Ours are the roads that fill in the gaps from the local side to connect to those larger DOT corridors. And so for us, we look at those ADTs, we spec out the road type and say, okay, this is a local street. This is a residential subcollector. This is a residential collector. And so that spacing separates that. At which point you're going to have development entitlement projects come before you, and they're going to specify whether the road's going to be public or private. The standards are the same. And basically all the only language that's added with this tonight that would go into the UDO would say public and private streets shall be the same, spec, dimension, whatever. And that's about as simple as it is. And then the individual developers will come before you and say, hey, I'm going to develop a residential subcollector, and we're going to do it as a private street. And that's a part of your consideration when you review those documents. There's not like two competing standards. It's more of you provide the opportunity, allow someone to use it. They know they're held to the same standard either way.
Yeah, there's a couple of sections in the UDO that refer to it just being public. So we would just say public or private, so that you add that private option as well for public and private infrastructure. But if you're asking for a staff memo, then we can look at doing that and maybe talk more on that when we get to the timeline, if that's.
And I'll say too, generally from a pros and cons standpoint, which is separate from the UDO language, the pros for a private developer to keep a road private, because again, most people want to parlay or palm that off onto the public, so they don't have to maintain that into perpetuity. And I don't mean anything by the choice of words there. It's just kind of the reality of it. The advantage from a development side, the private side, is that you get control over those streets. So you control who accesses those streets, i.e. you can gate it. You also get control in terms of if you want any special events. So, if you want to close the road down to have a big festival in your neighborhood or big festival in your commercial subdivision or whatever it may be, there are an easier track to do that if the road's private versus if it's public. And so there's a cost and a use of it. That's really where the pros and cons come in of, do we need the convenience of closing the road down at will? If so, then it's probably lends itself more to be private, or we want to restrict access. Otherwise, I think the pros on the development side move to getting out of the financial burden that is maintaining roads and making that a public good for the town to maintain.
Yeah.
And we would just need to make sure we keep that up in our records too, with requests for repairs, that we're, only going out to repair public roads that we're getting PAL bill funding for, and not private roads.
Our PAL bill map every year requires us to list the streets in our jurisdiction as well as who maintains them. So when you look at the map, there'll be 3 different colors on that PAL bill listing, and it'll list town maintained, NCDOT maintained, and private maintained. In North Carolina, counties do not maintain roads. There is a very small provision that allows them to have a road for a very short period of time within a county subdivision before they have to give it to DOT. But that's such an obscure thing that we really won't even discuss it. But for our purposes here, there's only 3 options, and that PAL bill listing will have those. And so if they ever convert, then the PAL bill money is based on our mileage that we have in our jurisdiction. And so we'll keep that up to date, and it affects everything from pothole maintenance to street signs to snow plows, you name it. Any maintenance on those is restricted to only public.
And Chris, what about speed limits and traffic calming on those roads?
Traffic calming would be up to them because it's privately maintained. Certainly they'd have to pass the bar of emergency access, so it couldn't be so prohibitive. But be it speed bumps, speed tables, chicanes, any other type of traffic calming device, that's also an advantage of the private side to be able to internalize their own prescriptive measures for traffic calming. Speed limits, I might defer to Mr. Messick on that. I think the private side has the autonomy to take the speed, but obviously police, they don't have their own police likely to enforce that. So I'll defer to Mr. Messick.
The town certainly doesn't have any authority on a private street to regulate parking or speed limit.
Thank you.
Did you say they do not have the ability to regulate parking and speed limit?
Yes.
Okay. And I would think that the speed limit and or the parking would be part of the original design of the roadway, identified as such. So the geometry associated with a roadway is linked to its speed, that it can accommodate a vehicle. And I think that's part of what would identify and define the speed in any private road as well as a public road.
Yeah, I think that's where in most instances you see the speed limits of 18 miles an hour,
right?
Or the obscure ones. Those are telltale signs of a private street.
10 and a half.
Yeah. It seems like it'd be reasonable to include it as an option. Obviously, it wouldn't be a requirement, but I think it'd be good to have the flexibility to have it as an option in the UDO.
Yeah. I think it should be the exception rather than the rule, though.
Well, I think it should be an option, and I think we can see how it plays out, because Chris, I appreciated the word pawn. I think it is typically unique situations that the private wants to maintain such an expensive thing. Most, I think, folks want their fellow citizens to help them maintain their roadway in front of their house.
But I think the primary reason would be a gated community, and that sort of trumps the road. So if you're going to have a gate, you have to be able to, restrict who comes in and out. So therefore, you sort of, by implication, have to take the road maintenance, because you can't have a publicly maintained road and be able to restrict access. So
right.
It just depends what's more important.
Yeah, and to Mr. Messick's comment, I think it will be the exception and less the rule, because the private developer is not likely wanting to incur the future costs of maintenance
forever and ever.
Right. But also just the board will look at the proposal for an individual project from an entitlement standpoint and say, that's a really important connection point for us, that we need these 2 roads to connect and we want to make that public. And so I think that will be your deference, is that if there's a proposed connection with the road network, I think you're going to want it to be public. So there's no restriction of access where, we end up running into a, proverbial brick wall and having to drive around your elbow to make that connection if it weren't for just that private connecting point.
Yeah.
So it sounds like maybe look at the option of it being at the board's discretion, not the developer's discretion. Is that what
I think the developer is allowed to propose it. But I'll defer to, obviously, to the board.
But would it be, are you saying that it would be the board's decision though on if they agree to it being private? Or if they're going to require it for it to be public, or?
I think they can put that option, the developer could put that option forward, and then we would decide whether or not that to allow that. That's what it seems like to me.
I think Chris makes the good point that I think from a transportation network analysis by staff, the board, whoever, that would influence a decision, I think, on whether it is acceptable as private or not.
Right. We would look at the whole picture. That's what it seems to me.
I think the UDO has a section on extending public roads as well, like public road connections.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So if it is like right.
Yeah.
So if
yeah, it's an important, I think, aspect and has been for years. And I think, we've struggled with, well, we haven't struggled, but we've seen that the timing of development impacts those interconnections. So we've got stubs here and there, but they for economic reasons, the development hasn't occurred as we had anticipated. And but those stubs are important because at some point in the future, interconnectivity is really important. And so to create those stubs and look to the future is always important.
And when you require both public or private to be the same standard, there's no convenience of choosing the private because it's cheaper to construct. They're the same cost to construct either way. And so it's really a call for what the purpose of the road is for future development. And so when you require the same standard, which I think is the important factor in this, there's no, I'll make it private because I can do a lesser standard, and then hope for the best. When they're both the same, I think we will see far more public roads than private, but I think there are probably unique and individual applications of private roads that make a lot of sense.
Mr. Kennedy, your comments on alleyways, I especially appreciated that because you anticipated my concern there. I am curious, not having had the opportunity to think this through, would what we're talking about, or how would the public versus private or requiring private streets to be built to the same level as public, how would that affect the tendency or the opportunity for the accessory dwelling units that we want to encourage on the backsides of lots that may only be accessed by, for example, an alleyway?
Well, I would think those will probably most likely be accessed via easement as much as anything else. Because if it was a true alleyway, you're probably dealing with a street that would have several accessed off that alleyway. Otherwise, you're probably dealing with an access easement for even, one, maybe two private accesses for that give it maybe a separate driveway cut to that. So I think the alleyway conversation is really where you're going to get more into, I'll say, actual subdivision review. I think most of the accessory dwelling units will be accessed either directly from the principal dwellings driveway or via an access easement that is kind of set aside for that.
Got it. Because the ADUs tend to be more one-off and I guess I could say organic, spontaneous, rather than subdivision that would be planned with an alleyway.
Correct. And they probably don't want to go to the expense of, because our alleyway standard would be more robust than just a simple access easement would require. And they probably don't want to go to that level of construction for just an accessory dwelling unit.
Right. Okay.
And I know in other places, particularly that I'm familiar with up north, they many of the subdivisions have alleyways that are used for trash pickup and all those sort of things. And I'm thinking in a private road, whether or not the subdivision, if that's appropriate, would then be responsible for contracting with their own trash pickup, or they rely on the town?
No, we would still service those. I mean, we could do either one, but there's no disconnect in service. So with our waste industries contract, if a road were private, they're still allowed to enter. And that's not considered any maintenance on our part. It's just a separate service.
Okay.
That they would be allowed to enter, traverse the roads, go pick up the trash and pull it back out just like they would if there was whether it was public or not.
Okay.
So to know with moving forward, would the board like staff to incorporate the private option in with the proposed UDO? Come back at a later time with advantages versus disadvantages? Or do you want that sooner before the language is incorporated in the UDO?
Sounds like it's not a big effort to insert or remove the language. So I think it's an important feature of a community to have that as an option. So I vote to put it in, have the option of private roads.
So include it in the proposed UDO and maybe add it to our list for future discussion points, which it's a long list, so we can easily add that to it.
Yeah,
Is that
put it in?
I think that sounds good. Yeah.
I would.
I'd like to see the pros and cons also, if that's possible.
I guess my question is, with trying to move forward with the UDO and stay on the timeline, getting it adopted as quickly as possible, are you comfortable with including the option for now with it being private? And then we'll add it to our to-do list to bring back to the board after the UDO is adopted with that option in it. And then we can.
Right. I am comfortable with that. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. We will add that to the list. Okay. So we will move on to number 2, which is neighborhood compatibility. So that section was included in the memo, and I also have it on slides if we need to go through anything in detail. So from what I was told, there's been some discussion in the past about if this language seems to be too restrictive, if we're ready just to move forward on it and maybe add it to the list as well for future discussion and just keep it in as written, or if there's any major heartburn at this point that we might want to look through, make any simple changes now and move forward with the majority of it.
Well, I can say that when I met with Jeff for those many meetings that we had, we did, find some of the language in here kind of problematic to the point at which we did not resolve it, and we decided it was probably best for, what do we call it, the parking lot. Things like describing that the buildings must have a matte finish and fluorescent and metallic trim is, prohibited. And it's like really getting into the weeds from a zoning ordinance. There were some contradictions where it says, you got a hard limit on 125% of the parking allowance there, when we've got other portions of the ordinance that say, you can ask for something greater than 125%. And you can be granted it. So, there's certain contradictions in here as well. And one of the other key ideas was the idea that, buildings needed to be similar to each other across a street. It just seemed also that they could perpetuate some of the older design ideas and older looks of a community. If every time you got close to something else, you had to be compatible with it. I mean, compatibility comes in many different forms, but to copy and emulate, that's one. To juxtapose is another very important idea in design. So Jeff and I found it to be kind of cumbersome and said, you know what, let's put it in a parking lot and talk about it later. So that's where we ended our meetings. I think the last one we had was in October, I think, of 2020.
Teresa, for the benefit of the board, would you mind going over a couple of things within that neighborhood compatibility to give the board a reminder of what the proposal was trying to regulate?
Sure. So I'll just kind of go through it. The formatting's not perfect. Just kind of try to copy and paste it. So the first section is purpose and intent, which is pretty standard language. The applicability just talks about when is it required to meet these standards. So basically any non-residential building being built adjacent to or across the street from existing single-family land, dwelling units, or vacant lands located in the rural or residential-based zoning districts. It also includes any expansions if it's more than 50% of the floor area. So not if there's an existing, the way I interpret that is if there's an existing business already, which when I look at the map, the town's map, the majority of the residential districts in the center of town are pretty much built out. I mean, there's a few lots that aren't, the majority are, and a lot of the lots that are not built out are in the PDD and MUPD districts, which those fall under different zoning standards anyways. So, when it comes to like the MUPDs and Chatham Parks, they don't fall under the UDO. So we got to keep that in mind too, that they're completely separate from this. So we're not talking about a lot of lots. This would be more for like tearing down a building and building something new practically, for it to be increased by 50% or dealing with alteration of more than 50% of the gross floor area. So we're not just talking about like a small addition or architectural updates. I don't think that's included in here and it's not talking about the cost either. So moving on for exemption. So community services, I would think that would include government services as well, educational. Those would be exempt. And anything that's adjacent to or the proposed mixed use and non-residential based zoning districts are exempt. Some of the standards, so you talk about there's maximum height standards. So if you're less than 150 feet from the single family dwelling, duplex, or subdivision, you can have a max height of either 3 stories or 35 feet. If between 150 to 200 feet, up to 4 stories or 45 feet. There's also the articulation standards. So if it's like a multi-use type building, the less intense type uses would have to be closest to the single family dwelling, which I think that could be kind of difficult in trying to enforce as well. building orientation, so similar roof types, pitched roofs, the porches, balconies, and outdoor activity areas for a proposed commercial use would have to face away from the rural and residential zoning district property. And no single storefront occupying more than 50% of the total facade width. So there has to be some articulation there as well. It can't just be like a completely flat front. And here, this small portion, yeah, pitched roofs. So colors, primarily matte finishes. So it can't be glossy. You can have glossy paint on trims and accents, and fluorescent metallic paint is prohibited. And the least, like I said, the least intense use, if it's a multi-building placement, the least intense use has to be what's closest to that single family dwelling. Off street, so a maximum of 125% allowed of the required minimum. So basically trying to steer away from that like sea of parking lots. And then with the priority, so if there's a proposed parking lot, it should be top priority closest adjacent to another parking lot. And it goes down to the least priority would be that parking lot being adjacent to that single family dwelling. So other site features, the loading area needs to be away from the single family, screened. Drive-through facilities, I thought this was really restrictive. Says in no instance shall the drive-through or pickup window be located on the building facade that faces a single family detached or two-family dwelling or adjacent to vacant lands. So if it's surrounded by, vacant residential property, then you could not have a drive-through. And then it also says the pickup window, the drive-through pickup window has to be at least 300 feet from a lot containing a single family detached. So that might be difficult as well to meet that standard.
I'll interrupt if I may. That was one that I remember, I think that it was in the additional elements for the Chatham Park Master Plan that we had some conversation about this before, or maybe it was during the UDO conversation. And I thought several of us favored this because of the concerns of single family or two family resident, dwelling folks not wanting to hear the drive-through speaker rattling off all day long people's orders.
Okay. So I would think too, though, that the town has a noise ordinance, and I think you're only allowed to have a certain decibel at the property line. So I wonder.
That would not even touch a voice box.
Yeah, I don't think so.
It would. I mean, unless you have to order through a jackhammer Morse code, it would never be nearly loud enough. So
right.
That would be one, Commissioner Bonnet's. Again, there's some creative ways to incorporate some supplemental conditions or standards. Some of the table notes with the table of authorized land uses, or perhaps other places that if there's an individual standard like this one, I think it's a good conversation to say if there are functions of this that you say, I think that's a worthwhile standard because I know we've talked about it, I know we've debated it, then staff can help cherry pick those out and insert them if we decide that neighborhood compatibility as a holistic approach that, as we see here, is not desired. Then maybe we can still pull some of these and insert them to allow it to be enforceable.
Yeah, that'd be good because I think maybe this is the wrong place if that's what I'm hearing you say. Maybe there are other locations in our ordinances where we can control or restrict or discourage drive-throughs. But I think, my own inclination is that I would like to see less drive-throughs in the world and more pedestrian features. But Commissioner Fiocco, I think you were trying to pipe up, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah. I remember the conversation about the ordering stations, and I think it had to do with the Eagles project. I think we were concerned about it being in its in many ways, we were concerned about its current location. And I think we also had some concerns about the proximity of the car wash to the small street cafe and the sound associated with that as well.
I think I often, in talking about neighborhood compatibility, Eagles comes up a lot. I'm not sure that this would address that either, and that it talks about, residential uses and mixed use areas and things like that. I'm not sure that this would cover that specific situation. I think the idea of neighborhood compatibility would be a great tool for planning staff to have. But reading through this, I do see a lot of things that, be difficult to enforce or interpret, I think. And I don't know how operational standards would be enforced if somebody picked up trash at 7:30 at night. What do we do about that? But I think it's come up a lot recently in terms of some rezonings and some site plans and things where the idea of neighborhood compatibility would be good to have. So I don't know how we deal with that on a professional manner, from the planning staff. But
well, one of the interesting things that came to mind as I heard Teresa reading through it was the idea that the least intense business needs to be the one closest to the residents. And we all know that tenants change, occupants change. So now staff is in a position of trying to gauge whether or not the use that wants to go back in there, it's a permitted use by right. So a tenant and a landlord are going to sign a lease agreement, and then somehow staff's going to have to interject to say, if there's a building permitted associated with it, changing electrical, mechanical, plumbing, something, that'll be the opportunity for staff to say, hey, wait a minute, you can't do this. This is not the least intense use in this structure. So no, you can't do this. Hey, that's so hard to predict in the future. And so honestly, I think you create more durable regulations that don't require that kind of, I don't know what the best word is for this kind of hyper analysis of uses, but buffers and setbacks, those things are good tools that help, not introduce language such as making a determination as which use is less intense.
Yeah, and Commissioner Fiocco, you took the words out of my mouth with talking about buffers. My response to Commissioner Shipp was basically whether people know it or not, neighborhood compatibility is throughout someone's ordinance based upon different setbacks through different zoning classifications, buffering requirements between certain uses. That if you're residential abutting, there's no buffer. But if it's commercial to residential, maybe there's a 20-foot buffer, maybe a 50-foot buffer, depending on what the use. So there are more, I guess, objective ways that we can regulate it in terms of zoning category to zoning category, where we can stay perhaps a little form-based and say whoever wants to build to the form that we allow, that the use is permitted, can go in there, whether they're residential or commercial. There's some protections with some of that, because if it's more of a form-based approach, everything's kind of put on the same playing field regardless of use, and you regulate it based upon your dimensions. And so again, I think part of the reason that Teresa and her staff and all of us at staff wanted to bring this up is that we knew that there would probably be a little bit of consternation about bringing this forward and having it in the UDO, and really of, what are the absolutes? What are the things that you say we got to have this somewhere in the ordinance, whether it's a watered down or reduced in volume compatibility section? Do we find other locations to put it in there to regulate the same? Or is the board okay with just the underlying zoning requirements? And is that okay to suffice to provide that compatibility? Again, that's what Euclidean zoning is based off of. And that's really what our zoning is based off of in many ways, is the separation of uses that makes it compatible, and how we design that zoning map and where we put certain zoning classifications against other zoning classifications. That's that compatibility component. Future land use map does the same thing. So really the conversation is, are there other standards that you wish to insert into the UDO so that staff can enforce it to a different level or a higher level?
I'll tell you, this section does not inspire any level of funkiness. That was one of the things that we had hoped to accomplish, was to keep Pittsboro funky. And I don't find this accomplishing that goal.
Yeah.
I agree. I appreciate that description, Chris. I think that this neighborhood attractiveness concept or neighborhood compatibility concept is attractive with our current ordinances because they're so out of date and discombobulated that this would give us maybe some way to deal with that. I think with a UDO, an updated future land use plan, a lot of those things that would accomplish, I think, what we could accomplish with this. And frankly, I don't see how a lot of this is really enforceable, and it just makes it more confusing as a user of the UDO, but on both sides, really.
My individual assessment is it creates a lot of tripwires for staff, in that there are trying to go, take a generic code, which these codes are all generic because you applied to any project that may come to us, and then trying to go to the degree in which we are applying the scrutiny that's listed here to individual projects. I think, a lot of folks on the private side will say, X percentage of the project cost is the public side. It's the barriers to entry. And having a consultant go through this and specify, okay, we are not using fluorescents. We're not using, this is a matte paint. This gable is matching the home beside of us. I think those ultimately, while I think they're well-intentioned, I think they become barriers to entry. And I would agree from a professional standpoint with Mr. Fiocco on the funkiness side. Generally, the funkier of places probably don't have things similar to this.
Mr. Kennedy, are you saying that from a professional standpoint, you're an advocate for funkiness?
Yes. Yeah. I've had to adopt that being in Pittsburgh. I've participated in the areas, and everyone has their own. They have their own drum beat, but I like the fact that I can put a bench here and a bench there, and they might be different. I think that's as simple as that sounds. It's a uniqueness that I think we can really embellish here in Pittsboro. And I think that's overall part of the aesthetic and the mystique, if you will, of Pittsboro at the same time.
Yeah, I think you got that right.
I think a lot of the major issues around compatibility would be better solved with a good hard look at the allowable uses in particular zoning areas and those that would require an exception. It seems to me that in reading through this, and I confess I didn't go through it totally thoroughly, but in going through it, it seemed to me it created the opportunity, if not the reality, of requiring so much sameness as to change the whole nature of the community over time.
Yeah, I think when you look at heights, for instance, no one particularly, wants to be the 23-foot tall structure beside a 75-foot tall structure. But across the jurisdiction, I think it provides really unique kind of juxtaposition where you can see some of the old and new come together. I think we've all been to, a Boston or New York or whatever, and you see the buildings before steel was a predominant material, and you look at the old churches with flying buttresses, and they can't be taller than 50 feet because they simply could not get the stones up that high.
Right.
And they're beside skyscrapers. There's a unique juxtaposition to that, and a unique character that we can probably do at certainly a much smaller scale. But if we are so focused on the massing between structures, and that it's got to be a steadily increase in massing, I think you lose some of that character that may come with some of those seemingly stark juxtapositions.
Yep.
And speaking from staff's perspective, I can definitely vouch that these are going to be very difficult to enforce. Looking at C, exterior lighting, B, it basically says that you can't be able to see the actual lighting device from a dwelling unit or from a vacant property. I mean, I don't even think that's possible.
Well, and to your point, Teresa, from our perspective, staff, we can regulate full cutoff. We can regulate light emission at the property line.
The UDO does have standards already for lighting and perimeter buffer standards based on the uses. So that's addressed in other sections.
Right. And when we address it other places, and we have talked about a part of this process of trying to keep this thing to be less than a 3-finger code. If I'm either on our side or the consultant side, and I got a finger for the neighborhood compatibility for lighting, I'm at another section for lighting. Again, these are some of the tripwires that I think it's superfluous language, knowing that we already regulate that standard.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's best left to the idea that your light level must not exceed X amount of foot candles here or there or wherever, but to suggest you can't see the light bulb from the adjacent property when
the light device, basically the lighting device itself.
Okay, and what would that be?
The source of illumination.
Yeah, typically would be a light bulb.
Well,
right. I mean, it's not suggesting you can't see the light pole.
Yeah.
I think it's saying you can't see the light bulb itself, so you got to shield it. But if my house is 20 feet below the adjacent light, odds are when it's a 20-foot tall light, I can see it. I mean, it's kind of silly. I mean, I just don't understand that language of you can't see.
Or from vacant land, you'd be able to see it if you could see it at the property line, which the UDO has proposed. I think it can't be more than 0.5 foot candles at the property line that's adjacent to residential. Yeah. And also flood lighting, any kind of lighting has to be shielded away from residential property. So that's already proposed standards.
So it sounds like there's maybe a significant sentiment on the board. We might be inching towards a consensus that this entire section might ought to be considered for deletion, or at very least we've got some members who have concerns about some of these items and elements.
I don't think it should be in this next UDO. I think it can float around and be in the parking lot if we want to revisit it, but I would just strike it.
For Teresa's benefit, are there any provisions under any of this that you would like to see carried forward in a different manner? That if we strike the neighborhood compatibility, but for instance, we might retain the drive-through service facility language, I think it would be beneficial to staff if the board would go through and say, we throw out the bathwater, but let's keep these couple here and find a way to incorporate these in the UDO and allow Teresa and her staff to use their expertise to insert those as best needed.
Yeah.
Do you have a deadline for when the board should provide such input?
I don't know. It's
We're about to get to
8:50,
that.
maybe midnight. I don't know.
Okay, deal. I got it.
We're about to get to that. We have a couple of options, so.
What makes you nervous? As Michael Jordan says when he makes a bet, what makes you nervous?
I had
Now,
many more things I would like to remove if we were going to keep it in. So offhand, I don't have anything specific to keep, but
Okay, so is there a consensus to remove it and then we'll keep it on the to-do list for future discussion, bring back? And if there are any specific sections that the board would like for us to incorporate in the UDO still, we can do that. And we can talk about that timeline next. That's after we're done talking about this.
Yeah, I would like to see considerations regarding drive-through service facilities in compatible use tables, perhaps. I'll leave it to staff to treat that, but I don't think it needs to be here.
Are there any other specific sections that you know of that anyone knows of that you want us to?
I'll look through it with specifically that lens, and I can promise that before Friday.
Okay, so then that
while we're
brings us
picking on drive-throughs real quick, I often think whenever I drive by a Chick-fil-A that might be something to do about that. And I don't know how I don't think we can say Chick-fil-A, but you know, restaurants that expect a certain number of cars per day or something, they just seem to always spill out somewhere outside of their designated area. So I don't know if there's something we can include or things that have done in other places that
There are stacking requirements where you can basically where you have X number of spaces, and generally you provide a stacking lane is going to be, you know, individual car. You're going to say it's 8 by 22, and then you look at how it stacks backwards. And so you start at the window and say between the speaker box and the window, you need to have at least 3 stacking spaces. And then from the speaker box to the end of the drive-through, you can have, you know, maybe 5. Again, it varies. If you talk to McDonald's, they have it down to a science. They have it precise. They know exactly how many spaces, how many stacking spaces they need. But I would say probably the biggest culprits of needing more are going to be your Chick-fil-A's and your Starbucks. Those are the ones that are probably across the board your biggest problems in terms of stacking due to popularity. Some have figured it out, but there are some that just are catastrophic to intersections.
Well, and that's my point is I don't know how we would differentiate and say that McDonald's has standard stacking requirements while Chick-fil-A has double stacking requirements, other than what they want to do for their own customers, of course. But if it's, you know, expected customers today, or what we're able to do if that stacking extends not only out of the expected stacking area, but into the right of way and, you know, on into intersections and things like that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's not always as simple, but you would hope that, say, a new proprietor of a Chick-fil-A would understand that demand and realize that if they're out in the street, they're not providing a safe environment for people to jump in that line, and therefore their own stacking problems becoming a deterrent to their own business. So sometimes you allow the private sector to handle their own business, but I would agree that if we put Chick-fil-A or Starbucks in express language in the ordinance, Mr. Messick's fee would go up for us very quickly.
Well, we can just say that for the purposes of stacking, Starbucks and Chick-fil-A are the equivalent of an elementary school.
At drop-off time, yeah.
Well, the UDO proposes 3 per lane for a drive-through facility for like a restaurant. A school requires 40 spaces.
Seems more
Um,
reasonable for particular restaurants, but
But we can do some research on that. I mean, this was written, by Clarion. I'm sure they did a lot of research too, but if 3 doesn't sound like that's adequate, we can add that to the list.
put it down there somewhere. Yeah.
Let me say a
With
little
staff.
something about this neighborhood compatibility. I know what they were trying to achieve when they wrote that, because my concern has always been that I use the example, Horton School being beside some type of, won't say furnace, but beside a funeral home with a crematorium. That is, I think, what they were trying to accomplish with this. Now, if that's accomplished in some other part of the UDO, that's fine. But I know that that was the attempt at what they were trying to do. And I'm still in favor of trying to get something as indicated, the example of Horton being beside a crematorium or an elementary school or something like that being beside that. If there's another way to accomplish that, because this is quite a bit of information and quite a bit of different, I won't say rules, but different standards or beyond standards that you would have to look at. But the main thing I'm concerned about is that compatibility. If there's something within a specific neighborhood that does not fit that, I do not want it beside that, such as, again, the school with the crematorium.
Yeah, this section specifically for residential uses near residences. So the school and versus a crematorium, it wouldn't even be applicable to this section. The school itself would actually be exempt. The crematorium, if it were to be located adjacent to or across the street from a house or vacant land that's zoned for residential, that would be applicable based on this language.
And I think that was kind of what Mayor Nass was getting to earlier, talking about, when we look at our future land use plan, we're hoping to have that in the budget for next year to get that updated for us, to be following up this UDO. And we look at both the zoning classifications, as we talked about a few weeks ago. We talked about retaining the current zoning classifications in our zoning ordinance for the new UDO, and then looking at revising some of those categories when we adopt future land use plan. And then we see how some of those land uses within the individual zoning districts line up on the map itself. I think we'll have an analysis that kind of shows, okay, again, everyone has their preferable worst case scenario. If this use was next to that use, how would they correspond? And so I think that would probably be, I won't say a better, but it'd be an equal opportunity to discuss those types of conflicts as you've identified them.
All right, and then just to go back to one other situation, which we all recall because it was in Potterstone, where they were going to build it was a company going to build something and built it in Potterstone, and the individuals in Potterstone indicated that that was inconsistent with the residential area. So is that something that would have been looked at in terms of neighborhood compatibility, or is it going to be somewhere else in the UDO?
Which one are you referring to? Which business?
I don't know
was
if it's
it?
necessarily in here, but back Potterstone, and everyone does quite remember that, I'm sure.
Yes.
Basically, light industrial beside
Right.
a residential use.
Mm-hmm.
What are our mitigating standards that would either push that use further out so it would be less intensive on the property line, or almost preclude it altogether because it was close in proximity to residential? I think that's what Ms. Baldwin's
because we had,
Precisely.
because we talked about, you know, I know Kyle and I had some discussion in a board meeting a few months ago. And the idea was to take a look at the table of uses and some of those situations that, such as Commissioner Baldwin's talking about. And I think Kyle and I had gone through and provided a idea of which uses we thought would be incompatible when that zoning was backed up to a residential area. And what we were talking about was a use by right. That is, these are allowed, rather than uses that would have to come before the board. The board would have to say, yes, we approve this use, or no, we don't. And in the specific example that Mayor Pro Tem Baldwin's talking about, had that been the case, the board could have successfully, I believe, and legally turned down the request that came before them. But as it stood, that was a use by right, and turning it down, of course, resulted in a legal overturn by the court, and the use prevailed. So we had looked at the question, and we talked about it as far as Horton as well, a school. You know, you can look at the zoning and say that what are the table of uses that are there that are by right, and which of those are at the ought to be the with the approval of the board. And you could look at Horton, for example, and say, whatever those table of uses are, you can go through saying these table of uses would be so obnoxious to have next to Horton that they cannot be sitting there in a by right situation. So I think that's another way to attack that issue in those kinds of cases.
And Mayor, I would agree. I think with this effort of the UDO, you know, combining our existing ordinances into a new policy, if it's as simple as having a by right use become a special use permit,
yeah,
you know, where it becomes quasi judicial, but it is discretionary application of standards. So in that instance, if you created a special use permit, our role here at staff would be to create standards in which would make it okay.
Yeah.
And then if someone adhered to that, you would grant the permit, but if they didn't adhere to it, basically you enter into a negotiation about how to make it work.
Yep.
With any mitigating factors. All that can be done with this process. If you are looking at a zoning category and you say, well, I'm fine with it being in that zoning category, but just not right here where that property happens to be zoned that, then you're looking at something outside of this and you're looking at a rezoning.
Yeah.
And trying to have that performed. 160D makes that much more difficult to rezone property. So again, if it's as simple as adding standards, or if you're fine removing the use, I would very much caution you that if you remove a use from a zoning category, make sure it's somewhere else in the zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
You don't want to just outright preclude the use. You'll run into your own legal problems with that. So if it's what, you know, because the ones on the screen here, if it's in a C1 and it's also allowed in a C2, and you say, well, I really don't want it in a C1, but I'm fine if it's in a C2, then you can do that as part of this process.
Yeah.
If you're trying to rezone it, then that's a separate kind of application, and we can talk, we can advise y'all best from a staff perspective how to do that too.
Okay.
And Chris, it seems to me, I think you were headed down this path a while back when we talked about pulling some of the standards out of the compatibility to preserve and maybe add to notes for uses.
Mm-hmm.
That would be another way to manage the use by right, that if it were adjacent to X, Y, or Z, then it would have these additional conditions rather than the base zoning, as opposed to making it a special use permit.
Correct. So in a kind of a hybrid approach to saying just a little bit less than a special use permit,
Right.
but a little bit more than just a by right use, having the supplemental standards, be it a table note or be it its own supplemental standard section.
Yeah.
To say, you know, under these conditions, this is allowed by right. And you kind of shortcut yourself from requiring the special use permit, basically where staff could approve it if they met the conditions as opposed to the board.
Right. And then you have to, then those conditions are really important to manage.
Right.
So the proposed UDO does make heavy manufacturing a special use in both the M1 and M2. Medium manufacturing is a special use in the light industrial, but permitted by right in the heavy, the M2. And then light manufacturing is permitted by right in both. And there are some other uses that are industrial type uses, like construction related activities. Those are both permitted by right. So yeah, we can go through those and see if there's specific use standards that can be added to them to keep them permitted by right, or look at if anything needs to be changed to special use. We can add that. It sounds like that we can add that to the list for the UDO for future consideration.
Well, and if the board's okay with that, I think it'd be most expedient if the board calls those out for staff about where there might be a conflict. And I mean, some probably more obvious than others. But for the sake of redundancy, if the board wants to send us a note, just to say, hey, I think we need to pay attention to these uses, or how can we provide supplemental standards or conditions with these, or we want to make this a special use permit. I think if you can provide a little bit of that prompt, I think it'll help staff be more refined in its approach to try to get that language put in the ordinance quicker than not.
Sure.
Okay. That's good. That sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bowles.
So go back to the timeline. So when we have brought the April 26th adoption date to the board, that was based on knowing that there was already a public hearing. So I looked up the actual last public hearing date that I could find, and it was back in 2018. So Mr. Kennedy and I have discussed it, and I think we're both in agreement that we probably need to do another public hearing just because it's been such a long time. So if we want to try to keep that on track for the April 26th, then we would ask for the board to send us all their comments by Friday. I think someone said that they'd get it to us by Friday. So yeah, everything by Friday if possible, if we want to try to keep this deadline. Then staff can try and get everything compiled, and hopefully if there's any final discussion that needs to be had, we could do that on March 8th and try to get the final document ready in time for to set the public hearing March 22nd, and possibly have a joint planning board, Board of Commissioners meeting, public hearing April 14th or 15th. I think that's Wednesday and Thursday. So we have a planning board meeting coming up, and we can check to see what everyone's availability is as well. And that will keep us on track for the April 26th. We also contacted the Triangle JCOG, and they're working on several others 160D updates as well. So ours is, I think, third in the queue, and they said that they should have something ready for us to look at by March 15th-ish area. That should hopefully put us on track for an April 12th set to public hearing, April 26th public hearing, May 3rd planning board May 24th adoption. So we need to have it done by July. That's kind of when, well, that's definitely when it becomes state law. So whether we adopt it or not, it's state law. But so we should definitely have it done by then. But with this, talking to the COG, it looks like we should be able to have it done by May 24th. So then the question is, do we want to move forward on having basically 2 separate public hearings, one with the UDO and then doing it again for 160D? Is the board comfortable with just having it all done at one time? That gives the board a little bit more time. If you want to go through the UDO and see if there's anything else that you would like us to try and address, that'd push that back a little bit past Friday.
Yeah.
Good, because I can't make Friday. That would be impossible for me. Now, I will say this, that as of this weekend, I am through the UDO, but for the troublesome Chapter 5. And I mean troublesome in the way that editing it is just, I've tried so many different ways to edit that Word document. So I'm going to PDF. I'm going to edit it via that and I'll send all of my Word comments to you probably tomorrow, maybe later this week. And then I think in the next week or so, get you the PDF of Chapter 5.
And that's another issue that's come up since we first put this timeline together, the top timeline with the April 26th UDO adoption is somehow, which it's not surprising, but the formatting is the entire UDO, the formatting has to be completely redone. And so that is going to take us a bit of time. I mean, we weren't planning on having to do that. And now we are. So that does kind of put a little wrench in.
I agree that it does. And I noticed in the handout, for example, there's, missing links and things like that. I don't think it's something that planning staff really is probably good at. No offense, or should need to do. We talked about consultants in the past.
Yeah.
And I would certainly support that to keep planning staff on technical, functional things about it. And then if there's even time still to engage a consultant that specializes in organization of these.
Well, staff doesn't mind updating it. And also we're going to be updating the UDO in the future. So we want to make it where it's something that staff can go in and tailor when needed without everything in the UDO. I just think that whenever it was formatted, there was just so many layers that unless you were that author, we just even the page numbers, there's just so many layers to it, and section breaks, you just don't know where they are until it's too late.
So to Commissioner Sipp's comment, I've even contemplated, obviously our court system has been a bit behind, and there's probably a court reporter out there who might have a little extra free time who can just type into simple text or something. Like we can probably find someone that can just get the raw language into a Word document for us. We can do a little bit with page numbers and, chapter breaks and tables and stuff, but just having it just strictly down and just have someone take it to Word would probably be a benefit to us.
Yes.
Yeah, for future updates especially.
Yeah, and how does that relate to, don't we have a service now that's converting our regular ordinance to electronic format? Can we just start electronic with our UDO and then be able to print it as well? But am I remembering that correctly?
American Legal is not doing our zoning. They're doing just the code of ordinances, and so they would charge a page per page fee to go through it and put it into form, which could be an option.
I would expect that they would charge us, but I think that's particularly if we got our code of ordinances there, that may be an option for this if we're talking about a complete reformat at this point.
I agree, Mr. Kennedy. I'm sure that there's one or several fast typists in the community who would be happy to, perhaps they're in retirement and they'd like to pick up a little work. I know personally 2 people who work in desktop publishing, and that would be the specialization who the kind of person who would take the raw text from the court reporter and put that into the publishable format that we specify without wonky pagination and line breaks.
Right.
Yeah.
That's all we would ask for, is just to make sure that it's something that can easily be updated in the future, or we're going to keep having the same issue.
Yes.
Yeah, but I don't think that's a trivial effort. I think we should engage that
That's right.
as soon as possible for all these timelines we're talking about.
So, yeah, I would prefer we look at that second timeline, the 1060D update timeline.
Yeah.
For the public hearing. Is that it, John, for the public hearing? I think that's what that does, is buys us more time for the public
Yeah,
hearing.
buys us a little bit more time.
And I guess, yeah. And I don't see us going through 2 adoption efforts. Probably makes sense to combine.
How does the joint session of the elected body and the planning board strike you?
I think it sounds good, and we should probably look at that more often in the future generally.
And I'd like to know if they've not that we have a whole lot of time to ask people to take another bite at the apple, but we do have a planning board that has substantial experience and insight, and if any of them as individuals would care to take a look at this and say, hey, here's something that we really ought to cut, I'd appreciate their input. I don't want us to task them formally with that, but Ms. Thompson and Mr. Kennedy, if y'all think that would be appropriate to invite them as individuals to have a look and weigh in on simplification language especially, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, I think we could do that. Obviously be clear that we're not creating a steering committee again, that it's more of it's another set of eyeballs to help us vet this document. I think it's also important to know that we will undoubtedly have a series of amendments probably within the calendar year, even if we adopt this in April or May or June. That once we test the document, once we work with the document, and whether it's been, we've been burned by a standard or not, as they say, I think we will have a series of amendments to tighten it further. And I think as this board has appreciated over the last few weeks, where we've brought a couple of amendments to the board, I think this board certainly appreciates us being proactive and being able to respond to the feedback of our board to bring back and say, hey, this was an issue a couple of months ago or a couple of weeks ago. Staff heard that, we listened, and here's a proposal to help you through that the next time it comes up. And so I think don't think about text amendments as a bad thing, but think of them as a good thing about us being more and more proactive and refining our process.
I actually had written that down as I was reviewing this, that we should look at the process overall for text amendments and probably streamlining that just from the few kind of one-offs we've done recently, but also with the realization that once we pass this UDO, we've got a long line of parking lot behind it, in addition to the things that will make it into it that we realize don't work right, or are worded incorrectly, or whatever that is. So I think there's going to be a lot of text changes coming up, more than we've really done, and it probably will be for a year or two while we get this dialed in a little bit. So I think we should really look at that process and make sure that it's the most efficient while getting the word out to get proper public input as well.
So when it was mentioned for the planning board, are you suggesting that maybe we bring this to the board at their next meeting to ask them to review. It's the only thing is I'm afraid, kind of like what Mr. Kennedy was saying with creating another steering committee, of
That's right.
we're gonna to try to stay on time on the timeline. There's going to have to be several things that we hold off on. You know, we add it to the list, but if we want to get the UDO adopted, I know of dozens of things that I think we should change, but it sounds like the priority is getting it adopted first.
Okay.
Because the positive outweighs the negatives. So
Sure.
And
Absolutely.
then maybe we could look at doing like a quarterly update, like prioritize. Now, if there's like emergency updates, that's fine too. We can look at that. But other than that, maybe we could look at doing quarterly updates.
Yeah.
I think Teresa, and if I may interpret what the board is discussing, is perhaps something where, again, they meet the first Monday of the month, something where we forward that out via the SharePoint or Bluebeam or some way to get that to them. And then I'll give them, until their first meeting in April. And just say, we would like you to take the month of March, read through this, flag things of concern. If you find, really benign things, Scrivener errors, spelling, punctuation, all that stuff matters. Is something a may or a shall, they'll be able to, again, extend our capacity, flag certain things, and then allow us as staff to bring those to the Board of Commissioners and say, I think these are worthy parking lot issues, to keep using that term. And these we want to address more immediately. And we factor that into the overall design. I think that would give them some buy-in, but also set their understanding that they basically have 30 days to get to us with something.
Okay.
Yes.
That sounds great. So we'll get that to them at their next meeting then.
I think that's good, because I don't think it's realistic. Chris, I remember you making some comment about the budget like this. If we show it to the planning board on May 3rd and then say we're going to adopt it on May 24th, it doesn't lend itself to incorporating that input, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It seems a bit disingenuous. So I think when you are upfront about what your expectations are and what the role is, and know that, hey, this isn't the end all be all. But we're trying to get to a better document. I think we all feel like the UDO is going to be a better standard, but we also, I think, are realistic that it's going to change strategically over time as well.
Okay, great. So you have longer than Friday to get your comments to us, but just as soon as possible. That'll be helpful for us, and we'll keep you updated on the progress.
Thank you very much, Teresa.
Yes.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa.
All right. There isn't anything else. Any final comments? I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I do have one.
All right.
I appreciate Shorty running this down with me a little bit too, but I'd inquired with him about enforcing the no truck detour downtown and related to all the work. It seemed like, from what I can experience, it was about the first week that no trucks did go, through the construction area, and then they went at night, and then now they're just going all day long. It turns out that we are not able to actually enforce the no truck detour, and the trucks can continue to barrel through the construction zone downtown on the circle. So my fear is that the people who are obeying the detour that turns out is optional are people who would be shopping and eating at downtown businesses, and it's not being adhered to by the semi trucks who are just going straight through town. So I think that's really unfortunate, and maybe we should even look at adjusting the signage for some of the future phases, knowing that it's not enforceable.
And commissionership to that, obviously Shorty and I have talked about that as well. Went to the highway patrol, talked to them about what our options could be. again, as you may be familiar with your standard driving test, North Carolina, the color of a sign matters. When a sign is yellow or orange, it's more advisory. It's less of a mandate. In theory, we could go slap a ticket, but it just get thrown out. And then, we're at that point, we're pseudo harassing people. And so we've looked at other or are looking at other ways to maybe solve the same, whether it's maybe asking this board to adopt a ordinance against axles, certain types of number of axles that would be able to drive through. And if that's a local ordinance, and that could be enforced potentially. So we're trying to find some, again, allow folks to get the necessary deliveries that they need downtown. And so it's hard to not have that kind of crossing guard and say, oh, you can't pull through here, and like, oh, I'm delivering food downtown. And it's like, oh, okay. And then the next guy comes and you're like, oh, well, you're definitely not delivering food downtown. And so it's
nobody's delivering gravel downtown.
Well, they might be for the DOT project.
Well,
Who knows?
not in those trucks.
Not very often.
I need them to drop a little bit of load off on East Chatham right now and fill some potholes. But we're trying to find, again, like many times, a creative solution to something that I'll say it frustrates me. I know it frustrates Shorty. He and I are getting a bunch of calls about it. We're trying to be a sounding board for people, pleading for patience and hoping for the best in a lot of ways. But I've discussed it with DOT and Sunrock as recently as last Wednesday. So I'm hoping for some better feedback this week from some DOT representatives. And as Commissioner Fiocco said at the beginning of the meeting, DOT's been fantastic to work with this. So I'm hoping that they've got somewhere else where it was enforced where we can have a little better idea than just saying, well, we got a sign there, but it doesn't mean anything. Because that is not what we want to have happen. Because I do think the detour is deterring some people from downtown. Hopefully people know the difference between their vehicle and an 18-wheeler, but it's just detours are inconvenient and they're hard to regulate.
And it's certainly a safety issue. I've seen more accidents downtown in the last few weeks or last month than I've seen in the last 2 years on detour routes, or just out on Hillsborough Street last Saturday there's one. So it's definitely, and walking around town is definitely much more dangerous around town, which was the idea of the detours to mitigate that. So.
Okay. Anything else?
Thank you, Commissioner Shipp, because I have heard similar concerns or complaints, and Mr. Kennedy, thank you also, and Chief Shorty. I'm sorry to hear that we don't have the current enforcement mechanisms, but I'm glad y'all are looking into that. I had one item, and that was back on our consent agenda, the Cape Fear Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan. I'm hoping that we can get that linked to our website, get the actual plan, either the document itself on our website or a link to that. And wanted to ask the question, do we know if that has yet been submitted to FEMA? Or is it still running through the traps of the local governments in our region?
I think there's some initial FEMA consent. But I do know that we'll get our resolution signed and off to the county tomorrow, if at all possible, so they can get it submitted by March 1st for us. And then I think the full package gets submitted with everyone who is kind of participating in that mitigation plan.
Well, I should have looked. Is there a Cape Fear Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan like collaborative website? If in fact that's the case, then I don't need to go looking for the plan on our website. But
did I sent a link to the board? Did you?
I completely missed it. I apologize.
Okay, no, that's okay. I send a lot of emails to y'all, so it's okay if you miss one little line out of the ones I send.
All right, so that is off of our website.
I will will make sure we have something on the website.
Okay.
And if it's not up there already, it certainly should be. It's a substantial size document, so it's best served from a link. And so Colby Sawyer with the county has been really a godsend to us with that. He's really taken a stranglehold on our behalf. He and I have met a few times on it, and he's really shepherded us along with that. So a big thanks to he and Mr. Newton at Chatham Emergency Management.
Colby Shepherd and Mr. Newton.
Steve Newton and Colby Sawyer.
That's very good to know. For my day job, I've been looking into these hazard mitigation plans, and they're surprisingly hard to find, even when they've been approved. So I would like us to be transparent in that regard.
Yeah.
And it occurs to me that there is some relevance here to what we did tonight with the climate change resolution, the 2017 climate change resolution, and perhaps even the former mayor's actions on climate, in that there is a pretty strong relationship between increasing severity of weather events and the hazards that are addressed in these hazard mitigation plans. So I'll follow up with an email making a suggestion about how you might put all that on one page.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have two things. Let me reiterate that if folks see places that would do well to have a sign saying downtown shops open, let me know. Let me know the location. What we've typically done is put them right next to a detour sign. So that someone sees detour and the other, they say, oh, wait, but downtown's open. Maybe that piques their curiosity and says, oh, I can go to downtown. So that's what we're trying to do. If you see good locations for that, let me know. And then I think it was yesterday, I finished my run as usual at the town hall site, and the big concrete retaining wall just on the back side of the gas station. It looks like a bunch of debris has been piled up against the backside of it. It looks recent to me. I don't recall ever seeing it. So I don't know if we can take a look and see. I mean, it can't be good for the wall. I mean, I don't think it's affecting the wall. The wall's pretty stout, holding back a lot of earth, so a little debris, but it's, you know, concrete and blocks and, you know, junk. And I think it's on our property. So I don't know how it got there.
Sounds like some illegal dumping.
I don't know. I don't know what's going on. It's a tough spot to get to.
Could be. I mean, I know we, Mastech, on behalf of the gas company, put some materials on that site without consent, but they were more raw materials and less waste. It was more rock and dirt that they were going to fill back in holes with. But I'll have us go around out there and check out what's on that site, because that's concerning. Certainly, you know, with two accesses on that site, you'll see everything from an RV to, you know, I guess now just construction debris. You know, probably Mr. Messick probably sees it as much as anybody does with his proximity to that site. But we'll definitely check that out. We need to make sure that doesn't happen for multiple reasons.
If you're standing in the parking lot on Salisbury Street, it's you can see it.
Is it on the gravel?
No, it's up on the high side. Yeah.
Mr. Messick, is that your debris?
No, I cover mine up.
Fair enough.
But Mastech did, and they tore down your fence, what was left of it. But at any rate, Mastech's the only one that's been back there, I think.
Yeah. We'll get to the bottom of it. Thank you for pointing that out.
So now we know if there's a pile of dirt on top of the debris, who did it.
Circumstantial.
We have a clear admission here this evening.
Right.
And it's been recorded, so.
There you go. Sorry for exposing you, Mr. Messick. The one quick thing that I had that I neglected to mention earlier, and it reminded me when we were talking about the planning board, is the County Board of Commissioners did approve Miss Charity Mize as an ETJ appointment. So at their meeting on February 15th, they did quote unquote ratify or officially approve our recommended ETJ appointment. As y'all may remember or recall, that ETJ appointments, since they're county residents, have to be approved through the County Board of Commissioners. And so now Ms. Mize is all good to go. We will work on swearing her in at the next meeting.
Great.
Very good.
Great.
Thank
Anything else from anyone? If not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night.
All right.
Good
Thank
to
you
see
all.
you, Jim.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Mr. Farrell.
Good night.